What happens when one of country music's biggest stars walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down? When Blake Shelton agreed to appear on The View, nobody expected the conversation to spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime TV history. What started as a routine promotional interview quickly became a battle of wills that left studio audiences gasping, producers scrambling, and social media absolutely erupting. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong, it was a full-scale verbal showdown that ended with one of the most shocking exits in television history. The morning began like any other at the View Studios in New York City. Blake Shelton had arrived to promote his latest album and upcoming tour dates, expecting the usual questions about his music career and life in Oklahoma. Dressed in his signature cowboy hat and boots, he looked relaxed as he settled into the guest chair with his familiar easygoing smile. "Welcome back to The View, Blake," Whoopi Goldberg said as the show returned from commercial break. "Thanks for having me, Whoopi. Always a pleasure to be here with you ladies," Blake replied, his Oklahoma drawl thick as molasses. The conversation began innocently enough. Joy Behar asked about his new album, and Blake enthusiastically talked about working with talented songwriters and connecting with fans. Sarah Haynes followed up with questions about his tour schedule, keeping the tone light. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until Whoopi decided to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Blake, you've been pretty vocal about your political views on social media lately," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "Some of your fans have been upset about your recent posts. Do you think celebrities should keep their political opinions to themselves?" Blake's smile faltered for just a moment. "Well, Whoopi, I think everyone has a right to their opinion, whether they're famous or not. I'm an American citizen, and I believe in speaking my mind." Sonny Hostin jumped in. "But don't you think you have a responsibility to your fans who might disagree with you? Country music has fans across the political spectrum." Blake leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "I respect my fans, but I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to sell records. If people don't like what I have to say, they don't have to listen." The tension in the studio began to rise. Whoopi exchanged glances with her co-hosts before pressing further. "It's interesting you say that, Blake, because some of your recent comments have been pretty controversial. You seem to suggest that certain policies were destroying traditional American values. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?" Blake's demeanor changed completely. Sitting up straighter, his voice took on a harder edge. "I meant exactly what I said, Whoopi. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma where people still believe in hard work, family values, and taking care of their neighbors. Those aren't controversial ideas. They're common sense." "But whose definition of family values are we talking about?" Whoopi shot back. "For many Americans, family values include acceptance and equality for all families, regardless of who they love or how they're structured." "I never said anything about not accepting people," Blake replied, his voice rising slightly. "But I also don't think we should be rewriting history or pretending that traditional families haven't been the backbone of this country for generations." Joy Behar tried to diffuse the tension. "Blake, I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that your comments might come across as exclusionary to some people." Blake turned to face Joy directly. "With all due respect, Joy, I don't think I need you to interpret what I meant. I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself." The studio went silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. Whoopi leaned forward, her tone sharpening. "Blake, you're sitting at this table as a guest, and we're having a conversation. If you can't handle having your views challenged, maybe you shouldn't be sharing them so publicly." "Oh, I can handle it just fine," Blake shot back, his accent growing thicker. but I don't appreciate being lectured by people who live in a completely different world than the folks I represent. Different world? Whoopi's eyebrows rose. What exactly do you mean by that? Blake gestured around the studio. I mean this, Whoopi, this bubble you all live in here in New York City. You sit around this table every day talking about how the rest of America should think and feel, but you have no idea what life is really like for regular people. The co-hosts exchanged uneasy looks. Whoopi's voice grew louder. Regular people? Blake, I've been working since I was a child. I've lived in poverty. I've struggled. I've fought for everything I have. Don't you dare sit there and tell me I don't know what regular people go through. Blake sat forward, gripping the armrests of his chair. I'm not talking about your personal struggles, Whoopi. I'm talking about how you and your colleagues here think you know what's best for everyone else. You sit in your ivory tower and judge people like me and my fans. Ivory tower? Whoopi was now on her feet, her voice booming across the studio. This is exactly the kind of divisive rhetoric that's tearing this country apart. The studio erupted into chaos, producers rushing forward, the audience murmuring in shock, and the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. What was meant to be a simple morning show appearance had turned into a cultural flashpoint, and it was only going to get louder from there. About knowing regular people? Whoopi shot back. I connect with regular people every single day through this show. You connect with people who already agree with you, Blake replied sharply, also standing up. Anyone who disagrees gets shouted down or called names. That's not connecting. That's preaching to the choir. The producers were frantically signaling from behind the cameras, trying to get the situation under control. But both Whoopi and Blake were too fired up to notice. You know what, Blake? Whoopi said, pointing her finger at him. If you think this show is so terrible, and if you think we're so out of touch, then maybe you shouldn't have come here in the first place. Maybe I shouldn't have, Blake replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But I thought I was coming here for an interview, not an interrogation. The studio had erupted into chaos. Audience members murmured loudly. Camera operators looked confused, and the other co-hosts tried desperately to restore order. Sarah Haynes stepped in hesitantly. Maybe we should all just take a step back. No, Whoopi interrupted. Her eyes locked on Blake. I want to hear what Blake has to say, since he thinks he knows so much about what's wrong with this show and people like me. Blake's face was red now, his hands clenched at his sides. You want to know what I think, Whoopi? I think you've forgotten where you came from. You've been sitting at this table so long, surrounded by people who tell you how brilliant you are, that you've lost touch with reality. Gasps rippled through the studio audience. Even the camera operators had stopped what they were doing to watch. Whoopi stepped closer, her voice shaking with anger. Lost touch with reality? Blake, I wake up every morning and see what's happening in this country. I see the hate, the division, the people being marginalized and attacked. And then I see people like you, with your platforms, spreading more division instead of trying to heal it. People like me, Blake said incredulously. What exactly do you mean by people like me, Whoopi? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Whoopi's eyes narrowed as she processed his challenge. The silence was so thick you could hear the air conditioning hum. When she finally spoke, her voice was dangerously calm. You know exactly what I mean, Blake, she said. People who have privilege and platforms and use them to punch down instead of lifting others up. People who wrap themselves in the flag and talk about traditional values while ignoring the pain and struggles of anyone who doesn't look or think like them. Blake's face went from red to purple. There it is, he said, shaking his head. I was wondering when you'd play that card. Anyone who disagrees with you must be a racist, right? That's your go-to move. I never said you were racist, Whoopi replied, but her tone carried an edge that suggested otherwise. You didn't have to say it, Blake shot back. It's written all over your face. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just disagree with someone's politics. You have to attack their character. Joy Behar tried to intervene again. Blake, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Nobody's attacking your character. Really? Blake turned sharply toward her. Because it sure sounds like I'm being called a privileged bigot for daring to disagree with the liberal orthodoxy. Liberal orthodoxy? Whoopi laughed bitterly. Blake, believing that all people deserve equal rights and dignity isn't liberal orthodoxy. It's basic human decency. And there you go again, Blake said, throwing his hands up. Putting words in my mouth. When did I ever say people don't deserve equal rights? When did I ever say anything about dignity? You didn't have to say it explicitly, Sonny Hostin interjected. But when you talk about traditional values and real Americans, there's an implication about who counts and who doesn't. An implication? Blake snapped. So now you're mind readers? You're going to tell me what I really meant instead of listening to what I actually said? What you actually said was pretty clear, Whoopi countered. You said people like us live in a different world and don't understand regular Americans. The subtext isn't exactly subtle. The subtext? Blake's voice cracked with disbelief. I was talking about geographic and cultural differences, not racial ones. But you immediately went there, because that's all you know how to do. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as several production assistants hovered at the edges of the set, unsure of what to do. Whoopi stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than her shouting. Blake, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've seen every kind of coded language there is. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence by pretending your words don't have meaning. My words have exactly the meaning I give them, Blake replied, matching her intensity. And I'm not going to let you or anyone else twist them into something they're not. Then maybe you should choose your words more carefully, Whoopi said coldly. Or maybe you should listen more carefully, Blake shot back. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had remained silent until now, spoke up nervously. I think we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Blake said firmly, his eyes still locked on Whoopi. I want to finish this conversation. I came here to talk about my music, and somehow it turned into a character assassination. I think the viewers deserve to see how this really works. How what really works? Whoopi demanded. Blake gestured around the table. This whole setup, you invite someone on, you ask loaded questions, and when they don't give you the answers you want, you attack them personally. It's not journalism, it's a hit job. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Whoopi's expression shifted from shock to anger to something that almost looked like hurt. A hit job? She repeated slowly. Blake, we asked you about your public statements. That's not a hit job, that's accountability. Accountability. Blake laughed harshly. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of saying whatever she wants without consequences. Without consequences? Whoopi's voice rose again. Blake, I've faced consequences for my words my entire career. I've been criticized, I've been canceled, I've been attacked, but I keep speaking my truth because that's what integrity looks like. Integrity? Blake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it when you use your platform to silence people who disagree with you? I'm not silencing anyone, Whoopi shot back. You're sitting right here talking. Nobody's stopping you from saying whatever you want. Really? Because it feels like every time I try to explain my position, you interrupt me, or twist my words, or accuse me of having hidden meanings? Maybe that's because your position is indefensible, Whoopi said bluntly. The words hit Blake like a physical blow. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he tried to process what she'd just said. Indefensible, he repeated quietly. You think believing in hard work, family, and community is indefensible? Your belief in those things is fine, Whoopi replied. It's when you use those beliefs to exclude and marginalize others that it becomes a problem. I never excluded anyone, Blake said, his voice rising. I never marginalized anyone. You're making that up. Am I? Whoopi challenged. Because your social media posts paint a pretty clear picture of who you think belongs in your version of America. Blake's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or frustration, no one could tell. My version of America includes everyone who wants to work hard and contribute to their communities. That's not exclusionary. That's common sense. But what about people who can't work hard because they're disabled? What about people who contribute in ways that don't fit your narrow definition? What about people who need help? I never said anything about not helping people who need help, Blake protested. You're putting words in my mouth again. I'm listening to the words you've already put out there, Whoopi replied. And they tell a pretty clear story about your values. Blake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what? You're right. My values are clear. I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in earning what you get. I believe in respecting the people who built this country. And I believe in taking care of each other. Whoopi rose too, her voice steady. I believe in lifting up the people who've been knocked down. I believe in using our success to help others succeed. That's not mutually exclusive with what I believe, Blake said. Isn't it? Whoopi challenged. Because your policies and your candidates sure seem to think it is. Blake's face darkened. My candidates? Now you're telling me who I vote for? I'm looking at who you support publicly, Whoopi said. And their records speak for themselves. Their records are a hell of a lot better than your candidates' records, Blake shot back. The studio erupted. The audience gasped. The co-hosts spoke over one another, and the production crew scrambled in panic. My candidates? Whoopi's voice boomed over the noise. Blake, I don't tell people who to vote for. I tell them to vote, period. But you seem to think anyone who disagrees with your politics is somehow un-American. I never said that, Blake protested, but his voice was lost in the chaos. You didn't have to say it, Whoopi continued. It's in every interview you give, every post you make, every time you talk about real Americans versus everyone else. Blake was gesturing wildly now, his Oklahoma drawl thickening with emotion. You're twisting everything I've ever said. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just disagree with someone. You have to destroy them. Nobody's trying to destroy you, Blake, Joy Behar said, trying to calm him down. We're trying to have a conversation. A conversation? Blake turned to her in disbelief. Is that what you call this? Because it feels more like a trial. Maybe that's because you're feeling guilty about something, Whoopi said quietly, but her words cut through the room like a blade. Blake froze. The studio went silent. Guilty? He said finally. What exactly should I feel guilty about? You tell me, Whoopi replied, crossing her arms. You're the one taking everything so personally. Blake stared at her for a long moment, then removed his cowboy hat, running a hand through his hair. You know what? You're right. I am taking this personally, because you're not just attacking my politics, you're attacking everything I am and everything I come from. And I'm not going to sit here and let you do it. The tension in the room was electric. Blake stood gripping his hat, his knuckles white, while Whoopi faced him, arms still crossed, unwavering. Nobody's attacking who you are, Blake, she said, her tone softening slightly. But when you use your platform to promote divisive rhetoric, you have to expect pushback. Divisive rhetoric? Blake's voice trembled with emotion. I'm talking about the values my grandfather taught me. the lessons my parents drilled into me. If that's divisive, then I guess I'm guilty as charged. Your grandfather's values don't have to be everyone's values, Whoopi replied. And they don't have to be the only values that matter in America. Blake shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. There it is. You just proved my point. My grandfather's values, the values that built this country, they don't matter anymore. Now they're treated like something to be ashamed of. That's not what I said, Whoopi protested. It's exactly what you said, Blake shot back. You just said my grandfather's values don't have to be the only ones that matter. But here's the thing, they used to matter. They used to be respected. Now, they're just relics of a bygone era that people like you want to erase. The co-hosts watched in stunned silence as the exchange unfolded, the audience hanging on every word. Blake, Sonny Hostin said gently, I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that we can honor traditional values while also embracing progress and inclusion. Progress? Blake turned to her, his voice rising again. Is that what you call it when you teach children that their country is fundamentally evil? When you tell them their ancestors were monsters? When you make them feel guilty for being born who they are?